Thank you, Dan. I'm really honestly flattered to be asked to do this, considering that I have been to in-person meetings of this group, but quite a while ago with my friend Jen Odens, and hopefully this will spur me to enjoy more time with all of you. But I was asked by my good friend Hamza Khan if I would help moderate this, and of course I said yes. And I like to say yes when I can, especially to Hamza, because otherwise he just send me texts and text to my wife that would anyway. So he's a wonderful friend, and I've gotten to know him over the past couple of years, and we've talked a lot about Jewish and Muslim relations. And I'm really excited to hear what he and what Ira have to say tonight about the subject. I really don't know much about it, but I'm excited to hear about it. I'm excited that all of you are here to take part in such an important conversation, especially with the recent spate of violence going on in the Middle East, really all over the world, but I'm sure we'll be focusing a little bit more on that specific region. So I think each person is supposed to have 15 minutes, and whoever wins, the other one takes them out to Shook. I don't know. So that's all I know.
Those were the rules I was told, Ace. I was told whoever wins, the loser converts to our faith.
Oh, right. Sorry, I forgot
That
about
is definitely the JIDS spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, conversion upon about losing the match. Got it. So, who would like to go first?
Well, I believe in age before beauty. So
There you go.
I have to go first.
That
But
makes it pretty clear. Okay, got it.
Ira, after you, please.
So, does that means I already won? So you got to convert.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see about that.
The problem is Hamza's already Jewish, so it doesn't. Doesn't
He's
work.
pretty Jewish.
So,
can you do the introduction of the speakers? Can you do the
we can
introduction
introduce
of the
ourselves
speakers?
if you want. I don't know if Asa has any bios on us.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have
Yeah.
a script. I can tell you a little bit about Hamza. Hamza went to the University of Maryland, has a personal history of being very good friends with lots of people in the Jewish community, both personally and professionally. Hamza has a background in politics and has been a guest on many national news programs as a featured commentator on Jewish Muslim relations, on Middle East policy, politics, and so forth. Hamza is a very intelligent, well-educated, and erudite speaker on lots of different issues relating to the Middle East. He has helped run political campaigns and also run his own political campaigns. He is one of the most, I'm trying to say this the right way. He's one of the most helpful and moderate voices of unity on the issue of especially Middle East politics and conversation that I've ever encountered. I happened to meet Hamza, and this is so unusual. I wish it was more common, on Facebook, talking about a conflict in the Middle East. And we decided to meet in person for coffee, and I discovered that he was even more interested and committed to dialogue in person than he appeared on in cyberspace. So we've talked a lot about doing projects together and to help inform our communities. So that's a little bit about Hamza's background.
So let me do Ira.
Great.
So I get to embarrass him.
There you go.
So Ira is a by trade a physiologist, a scientist. But for the last, God knows how many years, 20 more, he's been very, very involved in being a peacemaker. And I know Ira has brought people together, Jews and Arabs together in Europe? It was a program at
That's
one
right.
point. And he is taught on multiple occasions a course called Parallel Narratives Never Meet, where he puts the Jewish narrative on one side of the PowerPoint and the Palestinian narrative on the other side of the PowerPoint. And the beauty is that everything is true, and yet it leads to completely different conclusions. So anybody who comes to this thing one-sided will have their head in a swivel by the time they leave. And he's very involved in news story leadership and has not only the mind of a scientist, but the mind of a historian. Just encyclopedic knowledge, grew up in an Orthodox community in New York. So is also very knowledgeable about his faith and is an absolute really gift to the Washington area for those people who are interested in interfaith and Middle East peace. So I hope we've humiliated the two of you enough so that you can start talking, because I want to shut up.
Yeah, definitely sufficiently humiliated. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. So we're talking about the influence of America on religion and the influence of religion on America, in this case about Judaism and Islam, and I will talk about Judaism. So not all, but the overwhelming majority of the 6 million Jews in America today are descendants of 2.8 million European Jews who immigrated to the United States at the turn of the 20th century, from the 1880s to 1920s, 1930s. European Jews who immigrated to the United States, 94% of them came from Eastern Europe. They came from Jewish religious communities where they mostly lived separate lives from their Christian neighbors, or mostly separate lives. Judaism was also the greatest influence on pretty much everything they did. What language they spoke, how they educated their children, what they ate, what they wore, whom they looked to for advice. All of these were rooted in their Judaism. And that Judaism, with a few notable exceptions, was rooted in halakha, in Jewish law. Halakha is based on 613 commandments in the Torah. It's rooted in those, but it's really made specific and interpreted in rabbinic texts, especially the Talmud and Shulchan Aruch, which is kind of considered the go-to cookbook for halakha, for the average family, the average person at home, at least in the Orthodox community. Now I'm going to share my screen. And let's see if this works.
We see it. We see World of Our Fathers.
Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to change to the next slide. So I'm going to, let me do this again.
Use the arrow.
All right, this should work. Okay.
I approve of your granddaughter's team there, Ira.
Which, well, oh, the Argentine flag. We have family there.
Yeah, my great grandfather actually was an Argentine citizen. So
And my dad came to America from Argentina.
very cool.
Well, through Argentina. All right, let's see if yeah, that works. Okay, here we go. Finally. All right. So in practice, the Judaism that these immigrants practiced is what we in America would call Orthodox Judaism. It was not completely monolithic. There were Hasidic and Misnagid congregations. We can talk about what those mean later. There are Lithuanian, Litvak, and Galician practices. There are Ashkenazi and Sephardi liturgies. But all of these still would fall into what in America we call Orthodox Judaism. There was also a reform movement in Europe, but that was mostly in Germany and Western Europe and played a negligible role in Eastern Europe, where most American Jews have their roots. When they landed on American shores, these 2.8 million Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe suddenly found themselves in the midst of a more diverse population and a more secular culture. That had a profound effect on how they understood and practiced Judaism, and an even greater effect on how their children and grandchildren understood and practiced Judaism. Over the course of the 20th century, more American-born Jews began to affiliate with Reform congregations that had originally come to America from Germany in earlier migrations. And the children and grandchildren of the 2.8 million Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe also began to create new Jewish religious denominations, the ones that today we call conservative Judaism, Reconstructionist Judaism, Renewal Judaism, and the Chavurah movements, and there are some others. This process accelerated as fewer rabbis in America were European-born and educated in European rabbinical seminaries, and more of them became American-born rabbis educated in American rabbinical seminaries. And the conservative, Reconstructionist, Renewal, and Reform movements established their own rabbinical seminaries, providing leadership to these new, distinctly American forms of Judaism. How does the Judaism of these American Jewish denominations differ from traditional Judaism of their European grandparents? It gives far less emphasis to the particularism of halakha as laid out in the Talmud and the Shulchan Aruch, in other texts, and far more emphasis to the universal principles of social justice, human rights, and equality, which are reflected in other passages in the Torah. It puts more emphasis on Judaism's commonality with other religions and less emphasis on its uniqueness. At the same time, it made their Judaism more compatible with American values and with American social mores. Less emphasis, for example, on dietary restrictions and more on the Torah verse about God creating all humans in his image, because that, not necessarily, and that was a perfect fit for the verse in the American Declaration of Independence about all men being created equal. Many things their grandparents understood as divine commandments, they began to see as rituals. Mm-hmm. They began to see wearing tzitzit, wearing the fringes on the corner of your garments, wearing tzitzit as part of the clothing of Orthodox culture, rather than as a divine commandment, despite the fact that it is in the Torah as a commandment. They put less importance on praying 3 times a day, and more importance on all people being created in the image of God. They pay less allegiance to the traditional understanding of the roles of men and women, and more to the American understanding of equality. These new liberal American forms of Judaism.
We know this. Is he going to say anything new?
These new liberal American forms of Judaism took down the separation barriers in synagogues between the men's and women's sections.
I'm going to continue like this.
Men and women sat together. In the Judaism of Eastern Europe, only boys became bar mitzvah, and only men.
Ira, do you want me to mute everybody but yourself?
You might as well.
All right, why don't you,
I can unmute
I don't know how to do this if you, hold on, let me see if I can do it with.
I can unmute myself.
Okay, so, yeah. So you unmute yourself. There you go.
There you go. So I'll just go back. These new liberal American forms of Judaism took down the separation barriers between men and women in the synagogues during prayer, between the men and women sections. Men and women now sat together in these liberal forms of Judaism. In the Judaism of Eastern Europe, only boys became bar mitzvah, and only men were permitted to read Torah in the synagogue. In the Jewish movements that flourished in America, both boys and girls celebrate that religious coming-of-age ritual, and both read from the Torah in the synagogue. When I was a child, to the best of my knowledge, there were no women rabbis in America, none. Today, there are more women than men in rabbinical seminaries. Now, these changes are actually specific to America. They're not just part of an evolution that's taking place everywhere over time. There are today, for example, in Israel, 6 million Jews, about the same as in America. And half of them are descendants of the same Eastern European Jews from whom American Jews descended. But in 95% of Israeli synagogues, congregants still sit separate men and women in separate men and women sections, separated by visual barriers. And there are no women reading Torah and no women rabbis in 95% of Israeli synagogues. And 90% of Israeli Jews don't self-identify as Orthodox, conservative, Reconstructionist, or Reform. They self-identify usually as Dati, religious, or Chiloni, secular. And among the small minority of Israeli Jews who do identify as conservative, Reconstructionist, or Reform, the overwhelming majority turn out to be expats from the United States. So we're not looking at only the effects of time on the evolution of Judaism, we're looking at the effect of America on the evolution of Judaism. The immigrant generation was intent on losing their old world identity and becoming Americans. They often Americanized their last names and gave their kids American first names. So Yitzchak became Isaac. By the next generation, Isaac sounded too Jewish, and they substituted Irving. And when Irving became identifiably Jewish, and Ira Gershwin was famous composing American popular songs, the next generation became studded with babies named after their grandfather Yitzhak, but who were listed as Ira on their American birth certificates. I'm one of those people, but I did it in one generation, not three. So I am Ira, but I'm Yitzhak in Hebrew, but Ira in English, part of the Americanization of American Jews. And when the new American generation of Jews moved from the inner cities into the suburbs, they built Jewish centers instead of synagogues. And community, and it's the wrong picture to go with that, there it is. Community centers that feature gyms, basketball courts, theaters, social halls, Sunday school rooms, and also hall for prayer, which is usually called the sanctuary rather than the synagogue. Another profound effect America had on Judaism is a very large increase in the rate of assimilation and intermarriage of Jews. The rate of intermarriage among Eastern European ancestors of American Jews was way less than 1%. And 42% of married Jews, now the other effect that America had is on assimilation. 42% of married Jews in America have a non-Jewish spouse, compared to way less than 1% in Europe among their grandparents. And those who have gotten married among those who have gotten married since 2010, 61% are intermarried, a majority, significant majority. At the same time, intermarriage remains very rare among Orthodox Jews. 98% of Orthodox Jews who are married say their spouse is Jewish. If we look only at the non-Orthodox population, leave that alone. If we look only at the non-Orthodox population, let me see if I have that. Yeah, I don't have that. Okay. If you look only at the non-Orthodox Jews who have gotten married since 2010, if we look at non-Orthodox Jews, the liberal Jewish, the American liberal Jewish identities, of those Jews who have gotten married since 2010, 72% are intermarried. Only 28% of intermarried couples are raising their children as belonging to Judaism by religion. So it should not surprise us that polls show that only 1 in 8 grandchildren of intermarried couples identify as Jews. It appears that the number of people in America who call themselves Jewish may be expected to go down over time. Now, not only did immigration to America affect Judaism, but Judaism also affected America. In the 20th century, Jews constituted a minuscule 2 to 3% of the American population, but quickly grew to a massively disproportionate percentage of its intellectual elite. Authors like Herman Wouk, Clifford Odets, Rod Serling, and Ayn Rand often dominated the New York Times bestseller list. And through them, hundreds of Yiddish words entered into the Oxford English Dictionary. Wikipedia lists 8 pages of English words borrowed from Yiddish. You're looking at 2 of those 8 pages here. These 2 pages are taken up only by words beginning with the sound SH. all of which are borrowed words from Yiddish in the Oxford English Dictionary. Jews also make up a disproportionate number of American leaders in science. 403 Americans have won the Nobel Prize. Of those 403, 131 are Jewish, 1 out of every 3. Jews have also contributed to American politics in 2 distinctly different ways in 2 different periods of the 20th century. Jews were at the forefront of progressive politics in the first half of the 20th century, from the early union organizing movements all the way to the civil rights era. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union, the ILGWU, was founded in 1900 by 11 Jewish men, ironically. Shortly thereafter, women began to take an active role, and the uprising of the 20,000 in 1909, which was a gigantic uprising against intolerable sweatshop conditions, was led by Clara Lemlich. Lemlich was raised in a Yiddish-speaking village in Ukraine. After a neighbor introduced her to revolutionary literature, Lemlich became a committed socialist. She immigrated to the United States with her family in 1903, following a pogrom in Kishinev. In the second half of the 20th century, Jews were disproportionately represented in mainstream liberal politics. Jews held many important positions in especially democratic administrations. Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klein, his secretary of state, Antony Blinken, and his attorney general, Merrick Garland, are all Jewish. 37 Jewish Americans held significant positions in the Obama administration. You're looking at a list of them right here. 37 American Jews in the Obama administration. With the dawn of the 21st century in America, the space between Republican and Democratic parties grew into a chasm. That division was reflected in American Jewish society. An overwhelming majority of Jews associated with the Reform, Reconstructionist, and Renewal Jewish movements support the Democratic Party, while an equally large majority of Jews associated with the Orthodox movements support the Republican Party. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll leave you with a question that we can talk about later. Maybe I'll introduce the questions after the second talk. So why don't we first hear from Hamza?
Thank you, Ira. I can tell you all that I am not going to give you much of a presentation in terms
Hold
of
on.
PowerPoint.
Hamza, hold on. Ira, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah.
We're good to go?
So yeah, there you go. You're on.
All right, Bismillah. Well, thank you again, Ira. That was actually, I learned quite a bit. And as somebody with a background in genetic studies, I still learned a lot. So I appreciate everything you said. I will not spend much time in terms of creating a PowerPoint for all of you to watch. Rather, I'll run through some important facts when it comes to Islam's presence in America. And rather than America impacting Islam, I'll talk more about how Islam has impacted the United States and our modern American culture in a lot of ways. The first thing to recognize when we talk about America's experience with Islam is that about a quarter of all the slaves who came to the United States during the period in which slavery was legal in the United States were of Islamic faith. They were largely of Black African background, and many of them continued to practice their faith for up to 2 or 3 decades after they were brought into slavery in the United States. Because of the firm commitment of white supremacists who were the slave owners to stamp out Islam, Islam was eventually erased from future generations of Black slaves who had been in the US, especially after we ended the transatlantic slave trade. And so that's an important starting place for our conversation because of the fact that Islam oftentimes has played the role of the religion of liberation theology in the US. And on top of that, Islam has the distinct role alongside Judaism as being a reforming faith and also the faith of protest. Whereas Jewish Americans would play an important role throughout the 20th century in terms of bringing governmental reforms through within the system, people who would come to the Islamic faith within the United States were oftentimes of minority backgrounds that were unacceptable in a social context within a greater white America, and would bring reform and change through the power of the First Amendment, particularly through protest. When we think about that, we can easily think of Muhammad Ali, who ended up in front of the Supreme Court for refusing to participate in the Vietnam War because of his Islamic faith, which was, I think, the first time Islam was brought up so publicly in a Supreme Court case, and he won that case. You can also think of Malcolm X and his, at first, very troubling and controversial role as a civil rights leader, and then his decision to leave the breakaway sect known as the Nation of Islam and come into mainstream Islam. And from there, working towards pluralism and harmony before he died. So with that in mind, think of Islam from the point of view as those who oftentimes engage in a meaningful sort of dissent in American society, and how Islam through that has entered the mainstream of American politics to make a difference even today through the voice of dissent. I think we are all very familiar that two of the Muslims in Congress, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, whatever we might personally think of them, we can count them as the voices of dissent, particularly when dealing with American foreign policy. When Keith Ellison was a member of Congress, he used his Islamic faith extensively while serving on the Finance Committee in the House of Representatives as a voice of dissent, particularly because Islam has such a strong prohibition on the use of interest and the abuse of interest lending. And so Keith Ellison oftentimes played a role as a spoiler for a lot of unsavory bills in Congress. Even now, as the Attorney General of Minnesota, he's continued in that tradition of protest. Coming to a cultural context with Islam, let's talk about America's experience with food for a moment. How many of us wake up every morning and drink a cup of coffee, or enjoy a bowl of cereal, or enjoy orange juice? Raise your hand, or use the raise your hand function real quick. Most of us, I think, right? So this is important for a lot of reasons. One of the most important reasons is because the drinking of coffee began as a tradition amongst Islamic clerics and Islamic students during the month of Ramadan in particular, though also outside of that, about 1,000 some years ago, particularly in Yemen, and then from Yemen grew beyond that region, so that Muslims could pray through the night during the holy month of Ramadan, since we have a very strong tradition during the 30 nights or at least the 29 nights, to see if we can complete the Quran through a recitation during our prayers. In addition to that, outside of Ramadan, Islamic scholars and Islamic seminarians would drink coffee, which we know as kahwa in Arabic, as a way to help them study the Quran outside of the holy month of Ramadan. That is actually the first traditionally accepted time of people consuming coffee as a beverage for a purpose. Yes, it is true that the beverage itself, the bean, was found in Ethiopia. There are varying traditions about whether a Yemeni goat herder found them or somebody else found them, but coffee's intrinsic relationship with Islam begins from there. If you've ever heard of the drink called mocha, mocha is a port in Yemen from which somehow chocolate and coffee ended up mixing, leading to the drink we know today as the mocha. But that's why we call it mocha. It comes directly from the Yemeni trading point of mocha. So that's another big part of it. The tradition of drinking orange juice in the West, the eating of cereal, those come out of a bunch of medicinal traditions from North African Islamic scholars who are also medical doctors, who in their time during the beginning of the Italian Renaissance, when trade was open between the Ottomans and North Africans and the Italians, the transfer of knowledge from Islamic North Africa to Italy led to the cross-pollination of cultures, and with that, orange juice and cereal entering into Western society, and through that, becoming part of American staple hundreds of years later. So Islam's cultural impact on the US is huge. In terms of some other things to think about, how many of us are familiar with jazz music and the importance of jazz music, particularly in Black culture and out of Harlem during the height of the golden age of jazz in Harlem. I think a lot of us are familiar with that. Well, one of the most important albums that came out of that time period is known as A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. And A Love Supreme is actually a reference to John, it's in deference to God. He's referring to God when he talks about A Love Supreme. And the opening song on the album, which is known as Acknowledgement, is a mistranslation of when Sufis engage in dhikr, which is remembrance of God. John Coltrane's entire album, A Love Supreme, is actually very strongly influenced by Islamic Sufis and Islamic traditions around the deep love for God. And that's a really big part of our jazz society even today. Another really big part, but another thing I love to talk about is the influence of Islam in popular culture beyond the jazz scene. Let's talk about movies for a second. How many of us are familiar with the Star Wars franchise? So George Lucas spent quite a bit of time meeting with members of the Habibiyya Tariqa of Islamic Sufis in California. And from that experience, came up with a lot of the main concepts around that we find in Star Wars. The idea of the light and dark force is less a reference to Eastern religions as people would like to imagine, and more an influence of how the Sufis explained Islam's presence in the world and becoming closer to the light of God versus falling into darkness of shaitan, of the accursed adversary of humanity. Another thing that comes from that is the understanding of the word Jedi. So Jedi, which we hear often to refer to the knights, the warrior knights of the light in the Star Wars franchise, does not come from the Japanese Sengoku Jedi, which means a period of timeless war, of uncharacteristic war, which began before the Tokugawa shogunate came in the 1600s, but rather it refers to the term Jaddi, which is found in many Perso-Arabic and Urdu traditions to refer to spiritual warriors who are working towards coming closer to God. So, and that was confirmed by George Lucas in an actual interview in the 1990s. So that's another part of Islam that ended up in the Star Wars trilogy. Also, the holy city of the holy planet, rather, of Star Wars, Jeddah, is a reference to the port city in the province of Hijaz, which is considered the Islamic Holy Land, where Mecca and Medina are located. The Khyber crystals, Khyber is the pass between Afghanistan and Pakistan, where my father's people come from, the Pashtuns. And they're very famous for their swords and weaponry. So the Khyber crystal inside of the lightsaber, which makes it go, that is also a reference to Muslim society in the world. All of this information, all of this, what we don't think about on a daily basis is how, in the most subtle ways, Islam has been a part of the American fabric, and at least Muslim cultures have been a part of the American fabric since time immemorial. When Benjamin Franklin established the House of Pluralistic Conversation, a House of Discourse, right after the Revolution in Philadelphia, he was asked if anyone of any faith profession could come and speak there. He had based the concept of this House of Discourse on another House of Discourse in the city of Baghdad, which had existed under the Abbasid Caliphate, which he had read about from Latin scripts and Latin texts. And he said that given his influence from Islam, he would be more than comfortable to have the Grand Mufti of Istanbul, which was known as Constantinople at the time, to come and speak at his House of Wisdom in Philadelphia. Even Benjamin Franklin had a touch with Islam and was inspired by the idea of Islam's commitment to discourse and pluralism. There was a very good book by Ahmed Sachedina, talking about the pluralistic roots of democracy within the Islamic faith, and how originally in the Sunni tradition we had an electoral college that was in charge of choosing the original few caliphs, which then morphed into an Arab-centric dynasty later on. But it's important to note that even Islam has elements of democratic reform in its original governmental structure. That was likely not something that our founding fathers in the US were familiar with, but they were familiar with the importance of the Islamic faith because Thomas Jefferson held the first iftar at his residence while he was president, because of the need to have a meaningful relationship with Morocco at the opening of the Mediterranean Sea and the Ottoman Empire. And if another thing you might know is the reason that United States Marines carry a saber is because they fought alongside Muslim reformers who were fighting pirates in the Mediterranean around the place known as Tripoli in Libya, and were gifted the sabers for their remarkable bravery by the Muslim soldiers who fought with them. That's why the Marine Corps carries sabers to this day. And they call them Mamluk sabers in honor of those Mamluk Arab Muslims who helped fight the North African pirates. In terms of legal reform in the US, some of the most important figures that we have today working towards a more equitable system in the United States are Muslim Americans. The youngest FTC chair in history, a fellow Pashtun like myself, Lena Khan, is a Muslim American and has been working very hard against monopolies. Her very influential paper at Columbia Law a couple of years ago, focusing on monopolistic competition and how they are subject to existing monopoly laws in the US, made shockwaves before she went to Congress and worked on this issue there, and then became FTC chair recently. And then here in Maryland, Rabia Chaudhry has been the face of efforts to reform Maryland's very broken and corrupt criminal justice system for a very long time, leading to the release of her childhood friend Adnan Syed, and also the passing of several major reforms in 2021, despite a huge backlash from the state prosecutors who fought very hard to prevent any reform from happening in Maryland. Both of them have said for the record that their Islamic faith inspires them to fight hard when it comes to the issue of justice in the US. And also, in addition to that, this is where cross-pollination really becomes evident between Muslims and Jews. Both Rabia and Lena had a number of Jewish professors in law school, a number of personal contacts within the Jewish community who helped them develop the system and framework that they needed in order to achieve the reforms that we're seeing today in the US. We do not live in...
I just want to say we appreciate so much what Rabia did in our early years in this organization.
Here.
He was very involved.
Here. Yeah, we so appreciate everything she does. I think she spoke last year at JIDS. But the importance of the role of the Jewish community in helping Muslim Americans achieve their true potential when it comes to helping reform our society. Oh, I should also mention the woman who discovered the Flint water crisis scientifically, the woman who put together the research, is an Iraqi American scientist who also happens to be a Muslim. The role of Muslim Americans in helping reform our society today is piggybacking on the earlier work of Jewish Americans in helping us establish the very rigorous system that we have in the US in terms of both judicial reform and then in addition to that, societal balance. And the fact that Jewish Americans were at the forefront of so many progressive movements, including one of my fraternity brothers who was tragically killed in Mississippi back in the day during the Civil Rights Movement, is where so much of our communities have come together and worked together, especially in the modern context here in the 21st century in the last 20 years or so. It is not something that is often talked about. It is not sexy in the news, so to speak. But without our communities having these relationships, we would be in a very different country today. So I'm going to stop there. I will also point out that Islam has also been an important force when it comes to America's protest music. A lot of the songs we hear, including We Shall Overcome, were very important in the Indian struggle for democracy, in which Muslims played a very, very large role. And most of the music coming out of India's struggle actually came out of the Indo-Persian tradition, which was largely dominated by Muslim lyricists. So you have, again, the melding of these traditions that come into the US. In fact, my mom grew up singing We Shall Overcome in Hindi and Urdu because of that song's important role in the independence movement for both India and Pakistan. So with that, I'll stop there because I think I went in a very different direction than Ira. I hope that it was of use and some benefit to everyone here. Thank you so much. I give it back to our wonderful moderator, Asa. Please don't embarrass me again, though.
I think that I think that Hamza made me look pretty good for having said what I said about him. So both of our speakers really gave us such an interesting and I think concise and impactful overview of the different contributions and experiences of both Jews and Muslims in the United States. So I think it's time for us to take some questions. And I would just, this is my own instinct, is to encourage people to stick to questions rather than comments, so that we can learn from our presenters. Okay, Mindy.
Okay, fascinating. This may be a little bit of an unfair question to Hamza, which what you said was fascinating. First, parenthetically, I'd love any references to Islam, which came with the slaves. I was not aware of that at all, and that's absolutely fascinating. But what I'd like to ask you, if you could share anything about the organizational structure of Islam in America. I don't need to tell you, and Ira knows this so well, the Jewish community is extraordinarily well organized with all kinds of organizations and counter organizations and fissions from the organizations and so on. I'm curious if there's any North American Association of Mosques, if there are progressive imams, if they have any kind of organization, even using that term. In terms of the study groups that have been associated. Anything that you want to share, Hamza, or anybody else, again, about the institutional structures and how we can learn more about them?
Sure. So one of the most important things to understand about the Islamic community in the United States is that most people who came to the US in the modern era were not religious migrants, meaning they weren't fleeing religious persecution and were coming to America to seek refuge as Muslims for that reason. Oftentimes, Ashkenazi Jews, particularly those from the Pale settlements, came here in part because of the gross discrimination and also the violent pogroms that were happening in Eastern Europe to the United States, in addition to an economic incentive where, the whole paved with gold sort of mythology in Latin America and whatnot. Muslim Americans who are of immigrant background came to the United States as economic migrants. They were seeking to live more financially productive lives. There are some who came here as political asylees, not that many in comparison to the numbers of Muslims who came here as immigrants. And this matters because it impacts how we develop institutions and structures, namely that mosques were created oftentimes because there was a need for a place to pray rather than a need for community. Often, the original meeting place of the Islamic faith, of the Islamic peoples, was the mosque in Medina. There is a strong central focus on the mosque as a unifying element of Muslim American societies. But the way that developed was far later than what you might see in the Jewish community. I mean, from the very beginning, the Alliance Israélite from France played a major role in organizing Jews in the United States when they were coming over, no matter if they were Ashkenazi or Sephardim or West French, West European in some way. We didn't have any structure like that in the Muslim community, in part because Muslims come from over 150 countries in the world. So particularly here in the DMV, we have a remarkably diverse Muslim community with a number of religious associations, both at the regional and national level. The largest of which in the Sunni tradition are the Islamic Society of North America, the Islamic Circle of North America, and Muslim American Society. On the Shia side, the Shia community is a lot more diverse and divergent in religious opinion than we Sunnis are. The largest one is the United Muslim American Association, better known as Ummah for short. And that focuses on the Jafri tradition, which is Shias who believe in 12 popes or imams, and does not generally include the Zaydi tradition, which has popes or imams to the modern age, or the Aga Khani tradition, which still has a pope known as the Aga Khan, who lives in France and originally is from what is today Pakistan. In fact, the Aga Khan is largely responsible for bankrolling the creation of Pakistan as a political movement. So with that in mind, institutionally, we have these structures, but they're a lot weaker. And they're a lot more easily influenced by those who have wealth rather than those who need religious services. So you have the best way to put it is that you have an Islamic institutional structure that is more focused on catering to wealthy Muslim elites than it is in actually serving the needs of practicing Muslims. That has changed in recent years. There's definitely been an effort by ISNA and others to focus on being more representative of the Islamic community. But these institutions, for the most part, remain very South Asian heavy, even though only about a quarter of the Muslims in the United States have any South Asian heritage. That's largely because South Asians benefited from our long-term relationship with the US during the Cold War, and as a result had an easier time coming here with advanced degrees, particularly in medicine, engineering, and science, whereas people of other backgrounds did not have such an easy time, particularly the West African background, African American background, to a degree the Arab Americans as well, though many of them came here with very proficient educations in the sciences as well. And Iranian Americans, being of largely Shia background or largely secular at this point, do not caucus with those organizations. So it's a very diffuse institutional structure. So I hope that answers your question.
It catalyzes more questions. I just throw this out. It would be clear then that there are different institutional interests, cultural interests, perhaps of people who are Muslim who come from perhaps Palestine, North Africa, and of course people from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and people from Indonesia. So there are probably coalescences and divergences, and it must play out in very interesting ways.
Oh, 100% it does. I can tell you, my parents are South Asian, but I much prefer worshiping at West African and Indonesian run organizational mosques, including the Imam Center in downtown Silver Spring, and the Hanafiya community, which is Senegalese and a Gambian, which meets in Silver Spring as well, because I like diversity. The experience of South Asian Muslims, particularly of Pakistani versus Indian background, Pakistan was created on religious nationalist grounds. So the country has its expatriate community has a very nationalistic bent that overpowers their understanding of Islam and creates a lot of problems in the modern world. For instance, the Pakistani terrorists who took over a synagogue in Texas last year. Again, we have a lot of challenges that come with religious nationalism out of that context. The Arab American community is very diverse. They are about 10% of the entire Muslim community, but being Arab American is an experience in the US that is both has gone through a great deal of unfortunate racism and discrimination in the modern era. But in addition to that, it's not really a unifying factor, because when you are from Morocco, you don't even understand the Arabic for the most part that somebody in Palestine might speak. And you also have a very different cultural tradition, a very different set of cuisine, a very different sense of identity. Older Moroccans are very Arab supremacist, Arab nationalist because of Nasser's influence in the Arab world. The younger Moroccans are far more pluralistic. For instance, when Morocco came in fourth place at FIFA this past year, there was a strong sense amongst Gen Z and millennial Moroccans and Gen X Moroccans of cultural unity with Africa, Pan-African unity. Older Moroccans were furious at that and felt very strongly that Arab first, we are Arab, Arab, Arab. That's a very different understanding of one's identity. You see the same thing when we speak about the Indonesian experience in the United States. Indonesian Americans easily blend in with East Asians because of similar facial features, but their pluralistic understanding of themselves and the fact that Indonesia's Islamic clerics formed a union called Nahdlatul Ulama, or the Renaissance of the scholars back in the 1920s, meant that Indonesians have a far more educated and scholarly sense of their faith and an appreciation for diversity because of their large Hindu, Christian, and Buddhist minorities than you would see, say, from a South Asian Muslim, even though we have a very large Hindu community within Pakistan as a minority, and Muslims are a minority within India. Because of the violence that came with Jinnah's decision to partition South Asia in 1947, you have a very different understanding of religious diversity and acceptance, which is again based in religious nationalism vis-a-vis Pakistan, versus in Indonesia, where the Renaissance for the Scholars Association fought from the very beginning for constitutional protections under Islamic law for their religious minorities, which went into the original Indonesian constitution and is summarized in the Pancasila policy, or the 5 principles policy of Indonesia. All these things come to America as these immigrant communities enter our society.
Fascinating. Thank you so much to grapple with. Thank you.
Dan, you want to jump in and just make a comment here?
Sure. So I'll give one to Ira. And I'll make a comment, not a question. That's a question, although I am curious to see what Ira's response is. So it's well known that the American Jewish community and the Israeli Jewish community feel very differently about issues related to Israel. I mean, people are writing books on that. And it's also well known that we have 2 large Jewish communities in the world, the American Jewish community and the Israeli Jewish community. Every other Jewish community is far, far smaller. What I heard Ira say earlier is that the major trend, if you will, that occurred in America with the Jewish community is that the balance between particularism and universalism that may have been struck on the side of particularism for a long, long time shifted substantially towards universalism. So that leads me to think that there's like a fork in the road and maybe going in different directions, right? One part of the road branching out in 2 different forks. There's the issue about whether, this country is going to, if you will, shape Judaism in the future in a unique way, have an impact on Judaism to change the future of the faith, if you will, and not just the folk, towards a more universalistic brand of the faith, emphasizing tikkun olam even more, than our ancestors did, which presumably was substantial, right? But there's also this question as to whether this universalistic American brand of Judaism, if you will, which of course doesn't do away with particularism altogether, it's just the balance issue, whether that brand of it will fade away and shrink to the point where in 200 years, assuming there is an America, the Jewish Americans will be, shall we say, the primarily particularistic Jewish Americans, and the people known now as the more universalistic Jewish Americans will ultimately, die out and blend back in to the society at large through their assimilation. Now, Ira, you and I have argued about this topic. I think I am more optimistic that there is a staying power in this more, universalistic, if you will, approach, what you want to call liberal Judaism in this country. But I do understand demographics. I do understand that may not be the case, and it may be a smaller number than it is today. But I think that if you're an American Jew, it's today, and particularly in this case, if you're what you call a liberal American Jew, I don't mean that in a political sense, but in the sense of the movement, right? It's an exciting feeling that you may actually be, part of a process to actually shape the future of the faith, unless, of course, you forgot the point about the need to survive. So I will give you the chance, sir, to either give the other side or to say that you've softened your position over time and respond to that comment.
Look, we're projecting, soften my position over time. Projecting into the future is something that only fools, I think, should do. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I know the trend now, and the trend in America from the time Jews came in large numbers, which is only the turn of the century. And the trend is towards a more universalist look at Judaism. In fact, you talked about Tikkun Olam. They not only emphasize Tikkun Olam, the modern, the liberal Jewish denominations, that most of which were born in America. One was born in Germany. Those liberal denominations not only emphasize Tikkun Olam, but they changed the meaning of Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam in the Orthodox tradition was not social justice. Tikkun Olam was preparing for the Messiah. Tikkun Olam, if you look at the Aleinu, it's the Taken Olam b'malchut Shaddai, to turn the world, to fix the world into the sovereignty of God. It was preparation for the Mashiach. That in America has been, again, universalized, and Tikkun Olam to most American Jews means social justice, fixing the world. So the demographics don't look good. I mean, the demographics for Orthodoxy look good. The demographics in America, the non-Orthodox don't look good. We have, not only in America do we have Orthodox and now all the non-Orthodox liberal traditions, which are a majority of American Jews, but a large majority of American Jews are liberal Jews. In Israel, we have a different phenomenon. We have secular and religious. The secular Jews in Israel still identify very strongly as Jews, but in your terminology, with the folk, they identify as Jewish ethnics. They identify as Jews, as a nationality, if you like, and less with the religion. Where liberal Judaism as a theology is going, I don't know. The numbers in America look like they're decreasing and decreasing rapidly. It's hard to say. There are now seeds of it being planted in Israel. Whether they will thrive or not is anyone's guess. Whether there'll be a reversal in America things change by generations. The new generations in America are much more spiritually oriented than the first and second generations that came from Europe. And that spirituality may set fire to the liberal traditions, but the rate of intermarriage makes predictions very difficult in terms of what's going to happen in 3-4 generations to the liberal Jewish American population. I don't know.
The only thing I will add to that is that a lot of folks who live in the suburbs, and again, I think my daughter's synagogue, she may be the only congregational rabbi in the Eastern DC, right? Her synagogue demographically is completely different than the synagogues in the burbs. And there are people in suburban synagogues who might think that Jewish American population is dying out, that the average age is 110. I'm exaggerating, but you get my drift. It is totally different when I go to the Hill and see the folks in that synagogue.
And I agree. There was a movement among young people that's different from the older generations.
Right, and they live in a different part of town.
It's not showing up yet in national polls. I don't see the reversal in terms of an increase in the number of Jews, generation to generation, people who identify as Jewish, increasing among the liberal at the moment among liberal Jews. The only increase I'm seeing so far in national polls, I'm not talking about impressions from individual neighborhoods, is among Orthodox. The Orthodox have, first of all, they don't intermarry, and second of all, they have a lot of kids.
Okay, I'll let you have the last word. Thank you, Ira.
I think that Laura's been wanting to contribute for a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. So we've heard about how these religions have influenced the USA. I'd like to hear a bit more about how the USA has affected and changed the religions, especially more about how Islam and how that religion is changing due to American culture. For instance, the presentation on Judaism, we've heard that when Jews started coming to the USA in mass in the mid-19th century and after, that sparked the development of new forms of Judaism, specifically more liberal, less orthodox reform and conservative Judaism, plus the 20th century Reconstructionism. So my question is, do American Muslims in the 21st century think that the same sort of thing might happen to Islam in America? What new, perhaps more progressive, if that word being used, forms of Islam will develop and in time become more popular? What might some of those new forms of American Islam look like? Will there ever be American mosques, for instance, that mix men and women, families together in worship, the way the Reform did, in contrast to the Orthodox Jewish traditions? Will there be forms that place less emphasis on maintaining the halal diet or hijab dress? So I know that there have been some tiny efforts at such in individual mosques, particularly I've read decades ago, I think now, a mosque where the women were trying to be more equal and enter through the main door instead of the back door, that sort of thing. These have been controversial and typically rejected by the majority of Muslims, or at least Muslim leadership in the USA. So perhaps these attempts at developing a more progressive form of Islam were ahead of their time, but when will their time come, if ever?
I apologize. My younger brother is autistic, and he just came in the room to talk with me and was demanding that I change my shirt to something that's pink. So I missed I missed about 45% of what you said. I will try and be brief. Muslims might change with the experience in the United States, because Muslims belong to every culture and creed on the planet when it comes to their personal lives. The Islamic faith, however, as understood by Muslims, it has been rather unchanging for the last 1400 years, partly because so much of the faith is legislated directly in the Quran. And as the Quran is viewed as the immutable word of God. Yes, Hassan, you can have my phone. You want to say hello to everybody?
Hi.
He says hi. As the Quran is viewed as the immutable word of God, there's not likely to be much change within Islam itself. Now, in terms of congregations that have varying degrees of practice or varying degrees of orthopraxic focus, I will put on, my brother wants me to put on a pink shirt. Would you mind if I think it might be a good idea, Asa, if you take back control of the conversation while I have a debate with my brother about this very important religious issue about pink versus orange shirts.
So, I know Hamza has said to me many times that that Islam, it doesn't have the same type of, there isn't the same type of structure or sort of like potential. I think asking a question about whether Islam would go through a reformation, to use a word, like Judaism did in the 19th century in Germany, where we literally had, you can point to Zacharias Frankel inventing conservative Judaism, and you could point to I'm trying to think of the name. You could point to the different heads of the movements that took over in Berlin and in Hamburg, when they literally said, we're going to create a temple in Hamburg because we want to say that there will never be a second temple or a third temple. The temple is right here and showed their allegiance to the country, to Germany. That's not going to happen. I think what Hamza was trying to say in Islam, because I think the one major difference is that in Judaism, there's this sort of there's been an ability in the Jewish community for people to question to the point that like we can actually question the validity of the Torah's historicity, of the Torah's religious history. We can debate it up and down, backwards, sideways, and that's okay in most Jewish communities. But I'm going to throw it back to Hamza here in a second because it looks like he's
I'm now in a pink shirt. Per my
yeah, but I don't
brother's.
think that's the same. I don't think you guys have the same.
No, so one thing to keep in mind when we talk about the historicity of the Torah and of Jewish doctrine is that Judaism developed into what it is over more than one millennia, and it went from being the religion of the Israelites to a religion a lot of whose practices developed in exile from Haaretz Israel. Islam was yet legislated within a 20-year period with multiple witnesses who were able to write down what happened in real time. And so the Islamic faith has built into it a very different understanding of the idea of bid'ah, which means innovation, and how innovation can be allowed for or not allowed for. Core Islamic tenets were set up from the very beginning. The 5 pillars of Islam are unchanging and will remain unchanging for the rest of time. That's what Islam is. 5 times daily prayer, giving zakat, meaning giving charity to fellow Muslims at 2.5% a year at minimum, trying to go on the Hajj at least once in your life, belief in God and the angels in the last day, fasting during Ramadan. These are the pillars of the Islamic faith. They're not going anywhere. What we will see and what we've seen throughout history is the picking up of traditions that we find to be useful or furthering the Islamic faith. For instance, at the end of the opening prayer, our version of the Shema, Surah Fatiha from the Quran, at the end of each prayer in the Sunni tradition, Muslims will end with saying Ameen in congregation, in unison. That comes from the Hebrew and the Greek Amen, so be it. And the challenge here is that that wasn't something that happened originally in Mecca. That came into the Sunni practice after the Caliph Umar, who was the 3rd Caliph of Islam, had come to Jerusalem and had experienced that for himself, and it entered the Islamic tradition from there on. Shia Muslims don't do that. They don't include that in their prayers. Shia Muslims insist that one's hands must be to the side during all prayers. Sunni Muslims, 3 out of the 4 schools, believe the hands should be clasped at the waist during prayers. We have slight differences like that have emerged. In terms of what is the basic understanding of Islamic law or cultural understanding of what Islamic law is, wherever it's not legislated in the Quran, there has always been a great deal of debate about any given religious tenet or any given religious law. The British used to complain when they ruled over British India that they needed to codify Islamic law to their own liking, because a Muslim would go to 4 different Islamic jurists belonging to 4 different Islamic schools of law and end up with 4 different rulings. Whichever ruling suited them the most was the one they would choose. This was written in, I think, the Journal of Arab Studies in 1996, in the winter edition, if somebody wants to go and find that reference. So we've got a lot of diversity in Islam, but the idea that there will be a progressive Islam or that Islam will somehow evolve as a religion, we haven't done it for 1400 years, be as a minority faith or majority faith, because Islam, again, was fairly well legislated from the very beginning. It didn't need to have additions added onto it. It didn't have many changes in text, and didn't have a changing understanding of what it is or who it belonged to. Another thing to keep in mind is that Judaism is a religion largely for a given people, the Jewish people, the children of Israel. Islam is a universalist faith. It's a proselytizing faith. It views itself from a very different understanding in the world. While it recognizes Judaism's importance and Judaism's centrality to the Jewish people, or the children of Israel, as God calls them in the Quran, Ya Bani Israel, O children of Israel. In the case of Islam, we don't have a children of Ismail who are benefiting from this. The idea of Islam is to bring the word of God to any and all human beings across the world. So we would have to account for having a more Linux-like structure as a faith, if you will, so that we can incorporate all the different cultures and traditions from across the world while being unified in faith. So that's my answer to that.
Mike?
Yes. Laura and some other people on the chat were asking questions. What has America done to Islam? I want to share a few things. As a social scientist, for the last 20 years, I have made many observations. Definitely, Muslim women-led congregation has started since 2004. It is not very common yet, but the trend is growing. There is a Muslim progressive organization with about 40 branches around the world. There is a progress made. And then there is a mixed congregation has started in many mosques around the country. And then interfaith marriages, 40% of Muslims are marrying non-Muslims. And this is a definite no in other countries. But on the top of it, they're not requiring any conversions. You can marry anybody you want without converting the other partner. And that is going very big. And questioning Islam demands Quran that you question, reflect, and think everything you do. There are 48 verses concerning that, and many Muslims have been enslaved to the traditions. They dare not question the traditions. But in the last 20 years, Muslims are questioning. Somebody had asked the question, hadiths, the veracity of the hadiths, the veracity of the seerah, that is Prophet's biography, and the veracity of Sharia. These people didn't dare ask 20 years before. Now everybody is asking, and because of the internet, it has becoming common. Islam is not going to, it is going back to the original Islam. Layers of dust has been added in the last 1400 years. All of that has been taken out. Gradually it's happening. And also Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, his image carved in stone at the frieze in the Supreme Court, he is recognized as the lawgiver. And Thomas Jefferson had used some of the ideas from Quran about what law is, what justice is. And there are many more changes are coming out there. The word kafir means infidel. It was used as a derogatory term. Now the Nahdlatul Ulama that Hamza mentioned, the largest Muslim organization in the world, they have banned usage of that word from that particular point of view. I can go on for long, but America, I think I'll cut it at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Thank you. Yes, Kay?
Yeah, hi. No, this is a really interesting presentation. And Hamza, I'm learning a lot, especially from your talk. I wanted to offer a few observations, and that is on both Islam in America, as I understand it, and then, of course, from the perspective of someone who's Jewish, about Judaism. There is a book, I think it came out about 15, 20 years ago, called The Faith Club. And it's a book written by 3 women, a Muslim woman, a Jewish woman, and I believe, a Christian woman who I believe is Catholic. And basically it was started because in the New York, New Jersey area, because a Muslim woman was looking for a progressive Muslim space. And she ended up finding these 2 women of the other 2 Abrahamic faiths, and they started this discussion group, and then they wrote a book in each of their 3 voices Again, that's called the Faith Club. And in terms of Judaism, one of the things, well, one of the things that I've noticed is there are some synagogues in the suburbs where there are a lot of young people. My synagogue, Adat Shalom, for example, has like a vibrant Torah school and a lot of young people and a lot of kids. And in a lot of the kind of very progressive, liberal, American-born Jewish denominations or movements like Renewal, for example, and Reconstructionist, which is growing, which is what Adat Shalom is. They're kind of forming their own traditions. And one thing, it's kind of interesting because when you think about religions, cultures, languages, and genetically, our physical makeup, and of course, race is a social construct. Those are just moments in time, and they're constantly changing. And what we are right now is like a snapshot in time. And I used to be kind of disappointed at first, like if I'd go to my synagogue and hear songs, traditional prayers sung not in the traditional like Middle Eastern or even Eastern European Ashkenazi melodies or even Sephardi melodies, but in kind of more major key kind of American melodies. And I'm thinking, that's not what I go to shul for. It's not what I go to my Jewish community for. I want some of that particular stuff. But then it occurred to me, like, where did these other melodies come from? They came from certain times and places. And now you have a very large Jewish population in America, and we're picking up part of the American culture. And there's also been an explosion of Yiddish. And I'd be very interested, Yiddish, of course, being the language of the ancestors of Ashkenazi Jews, of my grandparents, for example, they spoke Yiddish. And there's a Yiddish Cultural Center in Massachusetts. There are, and now it has classes kind of all over the country. You can study Yiddish at the University of Texas. So that's kind of interesting. And just one other comment, kind of a cultural American political comment, is that right after 9/11, I remember when they were dealing with the anthrax at the Brentwood post office, the letters that had anthrax in them, and there was an investigation going on at that post office near Rhode Island Avenue in DC. The guy who was on the news all the time right after 9/11, who was in charge of that investigation, his first name was Muhammad. And I remember being very proud that somebody, if he himself wasn't a practicing Muslim, he was obviously born into a Muslim family. And he had a central role, at this time.
Thank you.
People might not know this, but the FBI agent who was responsible for us cracking the case within those crucial hours after the Arab supremacist attack on 9/11 by Al Qaeda was an Arab American Muslim. So that's a very important thing for us. Lawrence Wright was able to document that in his book, The Looming Towers. So just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, I thought that was the case. In fact, The Looming Tower was there was a TV series done. I think it was Amazon Prime, and it was excellent. Excellent. If you haven't seen it, James, you had your hand up.
Okay. First of all, a thank you to Ira and Hamza, I learned a lot listening to you and to the discussion. I have an observation that I hope Ira can comment on. Like most American Jews, my family background is Ashkenazic. My mother was born in Ukraine. My father came to the United States in 1920 with a Polish passport. That part of the world is now part of Belarus, I suspect. My wife, whom I met and we married in Rome, comes from Tunisia. The Jewish community has been present in Tunisia for over 2,000 years, well before the Jewish presence in Eastern Europe. The Jewish presence in Italy, for that matter, also antedates the establishment of a Jewish presence in Eastern Europe. I remember in 1967, while I was in Italy, I was in a train compartment. There was a young man there, and we started talking. I discovered he was Jewish. Where did he come from? Well, he came from the Soviet Union, but he mentioned a place that was in Central Asia. And I couldn't understand that because this is, well, outside the pale of settlement. Well, the answer was simple. His Jewish community had nothing to do with the Jewish community in the Pale of Settlement. His Jewish community had been in Central Asia also for 2,000 years, longer than the presence of Jews in Eastern Europe. So my observation is this, and I wonder if Ira can comment on it. The image, the stereotype, if you will, of Jews in America is that of the Orthodox community. To a certain extent, also dressed in black with the side curls. This is, however, from my own point of view, a slice of time in a geography from Eastern Europe, which has nothing to do with the roots of Judaism, as can be found through the branches that have appeared in all sorts of different countries where Jews were planted well before the presence of Jews and the emergence of Jewish culture in Eastern Europe. So I wonder if Ira could comment on this question of the image of who is a real Jew and what about the culture which is represented by schmaltz and herring and gefilte fish, which has, again, nothing to do with the cuisine of the Jewish community in North Africa, in Tunisia, and Morocco. Couscous is much more Jewish than gefilte fish there. What observation can you make about that?
So, yeah.
I don't know. How many hours do you have, Ira?
So no, I'll answer it rather quickly. First of all, my father comes from exactly the same place as your grandfather. Came with a Polish passport in 1924, but his village is today Belarus. So we are obviously your family and mine come, at least my father and your grandfather come from places that probably were very close to one another. So the influence, obviously, what happened in America was that a particular group of people came. First of all, at this time in history, at the turn of the 20th century, the majority of the Jews in the world were Ashkenazi Jews living in the Pale of the Russian Empire. 3 million lived in Poland alone, in what we now know as Poland. And so the American image of a Jew is a reflection of this wave of immigration that came from a particular place and of a particular group of Jews. Clearly, there's a Livorno liturgy. There's a Jewish liturgy from Livorno, Italy. I still have their Siddur. Those Jews those people came from Palestine, from Israel, to Rome at the time that Rome took over Palestine. And they've been there ever since, been there for 2,000 years. The Jews of Poland have absorbed an awful lot of Polish culture, for example, and so some of what we see as Jewish in America is Polish, but it came with Polish Jews, came with Jews from Poland. Challah is a good example. If you look at Polish Easter bread, you'll recognize challah immediately. It's Polish Easter bread. But here it's known as, and bagels and bialys and stuff came with the Jews. Interestingly enough, in America, we also associate halva with Jews. It didn't come with Jews. The Jews discovered it in New York after they came. Halva came with the previous immigrants from Syria, with Arab immigrants from Syria. Brought it to New York, and now everyone thinks of it as Jewish. So the same with the beards and the earlocks, which is a cultural thing from primarily the Hasidic movement and then some Misnagdim as well, the Haredi movements, and these ultra-Orthodox movements that are frozen in time, the dress and styles of a particular era in Eastern Europe, in fact, in Poland and parts of Hungary, parts of Romania, are seen here as typically, a Jewish typical thing, because that's where a very large number of Jews came from. So the American image of Judaism is based upon this particular segment of the Jewish population, the mountain Jews of the republics of the old Soviet Union that were actually Asian republics. They had many Jews there too, with very, very different traditions, different modes of dress. The Iraqi Jews are even still more different from the Ashkenazi Jews. In Israel, one sees more representation of all those groups than one sees in America. In Israel, one sees the representation of the Iraqi Jews, the Yemenite Jews, the mountain Jews of Russia, the mountain Jews of Kazakhstan, and even the Italian influence of Italian Western Jews, or the German Jews who never spoke Yiddish, despite the fact that Yiddish is Germanic language. So I was talking about the American Jewish community and the influence of America on it and its influence on America. But if one goes to Israel, one sees a much more diverse population of Jews. More than half of the Jews of Israel are not from Europe. More than half are from Arab countries.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah, and being Jewish in Israel is more a matter of where you live, and being Jewish in America is more a matter of what you eat and what you
Yes, it is.
celebrate. Shmuel?
That was true until they started serving bagels and McDonald's, and we just lost
Oh, please
control.
don't.
Totally, we lost.
I wish I would have never heard you say that. I can't go to sleep now. What?
Is it really a bagel if it's at McDonald's though?
No,
Exactly.
no.
You see,
It's
that's
a
so
chocolate moment. No.
Okay, I have a question and one point. It's important to remember the word religion does not exist in the Old Testament. It doesn't exist in writings of the Jewish people. God said, I will make you an Am, I will make you a nation. So Judaism is not even a religion. It's a nation of people. And it's important when we look at it, it's only something that we Americanized and made it. Either you kept the mitzvot or you didn't keep the commandments. And America, we made it into reform, conservative, etc. But if you looked at the immigrants in New York, if a guy had a haberdashery, had a hat store, well, he had to keep it open on Shabbos so he would make a living. But if you told him he wasn't an Orthodox Jew, he would punch you in the nose. And he would say, yeah, I'm Orthodox. I'm just a bad one. So we are not a religion. We are an Am. We are a nation. And it's if we keep the commandments or we don't keep the commandments. A question I wanted to ask Amsa is, in the past, since the 70s, there was a movement going, it started in Nigeria, of Chrislam, of trying to marry the religion of Christianity with Islam. Recently, Pope Francis promoted it at the Abraham Accords between Saudi Arabia and trying to get Israel in on it. And I wanted to know from Kamsa what the Arab view of Chrislam is, or the blending of Christianity and Islam as a new world order religion.
So I can't speak to the Arab view, since the last person in my family who was Arab lived in Iraq about 150 years ago. But from the Islamic point of view, the idea of syncretism with Christianity is nothing new. For the most part, Islam views itself already as a continuation of both Judaism and Christianity. So from that point of view, Islam views itself as not needing to meld with any other religious tradition. Such syncretic traditions are nothing new. Baha'ism in Iran, and then also the Ahmadiyya movement out of the Punjab, which is today in Pakistan, are two movements that have also attempted a level of syncretism, as does the Sikh religion, which was heavily persecuted by the Mughals while they ruled India, is also an attempt to bring together some sort of syncretic belief between Hinduism, which is a polytheistic pro-idol religion, and Islam, which is a strongly iconoclastic, meaning break the idol type of religion with a monotheistic focus. So it's nothing new per se. As for what you talk about, the Abrahamic Accords, just to be clear, Saudi Arabia was not a part to the Abrahamic Accords. As I recall, it was Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia maintains that it will not recognize Israel for the foreseeable future, though they have extensive hidden diplomatic ties with Israel. So I can't comment on the Pope in that regard, because I think we're mixing things there a bit. But you know, in the Yoruban context, which is where the Islam sort of movement comes from in Nigeria, the Yorubans being the southern people of Nigeria, the north being dominated by the Hausa Fulani, and the east having many tribes, but particularly the Igbo people being concentrated there. The Yoruban people are well known for syncretic religious beliefs between Christians, Muslims, and local animist traditions. So this is nothing new for that part of the world. I don't believe that is going to be a religious model that will dictate the future of Islam. Again, Islam believes itself to be the final iteration of Christianity and Judaism, with a universalist focus, whereas Judaism has a particular sovereign focus on the Jewish people itself. So I don't really see us seeing, I don't see that tradition becoming something that would be dominant in the Muslim world. So those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Hamza. I just asked Laura, she or her husband, who we didn't see on here anymore, had a question, because I know Bill had his hand up, that they're listening in.
Bill said his.
Yeah,
his
I did.
question went-
I
Go
did
ahead,
have
Bill.
my hand up, and I was going to comment on Laura Schulman's question about American Islam changing Islam. And I think for Jews, American Jews, it's tempting to compare ourselves with American Islam. We're similar in population. We're similar in having to adapt to the Christian society. But I think an important difference is that we American Jews are 40% maybe of the world's Jews. And Islam, there are 1.5 billion or 2 billion Muslims in the world. So the 4 million or so in the United States are less likely to have a major impact on the rest of the world's practice.
Yeah. I see James has his hand up again. Is there anyone else who wanted to ask a question before we go back for seconds?
I actually had a thought to offer
Mhm.
as one of the speakers, if Dan will allow me the opportunity. Thank you. One thing to keep in mind here, in terms of, again, there's been a lot of questions about Islam being influenced. Islam is a religion with a set legislative, faithful tradition. It is by and large across the 1.25 billion Muslims in the world, even those of a millenarian bent or who belong to syncretic movements like the Ahmadiyya Punjabi movement or the Baha'i tradition, which is now a separate religion, generally agree that Islam is more or less unchanging as a faith. A lot of your questions are dealing with Muslims versus Islam, the religion. The importance and the difference here is that Judaism is largely a religion of rabbinic tradition. It was legislated and promulgated by human beings who came after the original kingdom of Israel fell, while the people were in exile and trying to continue traditions and religious beliefs that could no longer be done directly because the people of Israel were no longer in Israel. Islam has never had such an experience. Muslims have never had such an experience. And Muslims, again, come from a very wide array of cultural and racial backgrounds as it is. Islam unifies us in our worship of the one God. It does not unify us in our day-to-day cultural experiences. So keep in mind that frame of reference when you're asking your questions. Muslims will change. Muslims will likely do all kinds of very interesting things in the next couple of decades. Islam, the religion, however, remains more or less static and the same. So just wanted to clarify that for everybody here.
Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing something that unifies us, and not in a good way. It seems like both Jews and Muslims are trying to create the other in our image.
Exactly.
And I say that not just with respect to this dialogue tonight, because I don't think we're doing it so much, but just generally. So Jewish people have seen in America our community, change in a particular way. We've reformed, if you will. We've become more universalistic, et cetera, et cetera. And so it is natural to assume, when people are not a member of JIDS, it is natural to assume that the same thing will happen to Islam. It will just be 50 years later or whatever. Similarly, when I'm with Muslims and the conversation comes up about Israel, Israel is always discussed as a religious nationalist state. I'm not talking about what's going on now. I'm talking about from the very beginning. Because when they hear, quote, Jewish state, the Muslim ear thinks, oh, I see, a religious state, because Judaism is a religion, like Islam. Hopefully, the goal of a group like this is to get people to understand that as similar as we are, and we have profound similarities that are more profound than our differences, it is important to understand the differences. And so when the next time you find yourself with your, if you will, your brothers and sisters in your same faith, and someone makes one of these generalizations, it's important to sort of push back. Whether you're talking about the Zionism as a religious nationalist movement, or whether you're saying, oh, it's inevitable that Islam in 100 years will be just like Judaism is today, right? Things, there may be some truth to this, but there's a whole lot of error. And so it's important for us to remember why we're different, not just why we're similar.
So I was trying to say something to Hamza, but I'll say it out loud because it doesn't matter. I heard this conversation in seminary 20 years ago, which was, when is Islam going to have an enlightenment or something like that? And the answer is, first of all, they had one about 1,000 years ago, and where they invented math and all kinds of other scientific concepts. That's the first thing. The second thing is, they're not going to. Judaism's enlightenment, so to speak, happened in the 1600s. And then going forward a couple hundred years, happened again because of politics. It didn't happen because of religion. It happened because Jews thought, as a persecuted minority, that they could get in better with the people, their host countries, by having a political allegiance to the state rather than being perceived as having political allegiance to Israel, such as it is. There was no Israel until 1948. But the point is that it was a political calculation to say a synagogue is a temple. We don't want to get back to Israel. We're not looking to get back to Israel. We're okay calling this the temple. That was a political calculation. Abraham Geiger did that in Hamburg in the 1850s. Samson Raphael Hirsch created orthodoxy in response to the reform movement. And then Zacharias Frankel came along and said, can't we all just get along? Let's be conservative. But that was all created in Germany, by the way. That is not an American phenomenon. American Judaism has supercharged it for sure, but it existed when it came over here already. Reform Judaism, conservative Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, outside of what we call Haredi Judaism, which is very Orthodox, fundamentalist Judaism, that aligns a little bit more. And again, I don't want to speak out of turn here. That aligns a little bit more with what we might call, we might look at traditional Muslims in a context of a traditional Muslim state, right? Like Saudi Arabia or even Lebanon or somewhere like that. Iran is a very complicated example. There is no non-Orthodox Islam, as far as I know, right? So there's no point in trying to compare the two sides because it's apples and zucchini. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Asa.
Mindy?
Yeah, hi. Again, an interesting thread to pursue. Of course, Yerushalayim, which the base is Shalom, peace, the city of peace. In Saudi Arabia, Mecca and Medina, those are places that are sacred and revered and precious. I'm wondering then, from our Muslim friends here, what impact Saudi Arabia has had beyond the fact that it is the geographic name of an entity in which Mecca and Medina are. Beyond that, what impact is there of those places?
Asa, I got a real quick question. Hello, Asa, can you hear me?
Mike,
We
let's.
got
Sorry
only
about that.
15. We got 13 minutes left. 13 minutes, and as we did last time, feedback. We got some key Muslims here: Safi Kaskas, Zafar Mirza, Hashmat. I think if you can get a 2 minutes feedback.
But wait a minute. But wasn't Mindy?
I just
In the
asked
middle of
a
it?
question. Yes.
Yeah, so Mike, I don't care if it's Safi or if it's Moses or if it's God. Mindy just asked a question. I love Safi, don't get me wrong. Safi knows that.
Well, I was just watching on the time.
There's a question pending. So, I mean, if you're saying people should keep it short, great. But go ahead, let Mindy get her question answered.
Mindy, could you repeat your question once more?
Yes, please.
Yes, I've drawn a parallel to the preciousness in the Jewish tradition of Jerusalem for all of its historical and religious linkages, and also in Islam to Mecca. And I'm asking, in terms of contemporary Islamic life, the impact of Mecca, that journey, that time, how it's influenced people who return. Can you even make any generalizations? But I'm just drawing a parallel in these two great traditions of these two holy cities.
So the first thing is that this is a very interesting point in the Islamic faith. Traditionally, many Muslims view Jerusalem, Al-Quds, the farthest mosque, Masjid al-Aqsa, being in Al-Quds, as the third holiest site in the Islamic faith. There are several Islamic scholars here. Maybe they can help me with this. I do not recall there being being legislated into Islamic faith itself. My brother wants us to come and say hello, though. The city of Mecca is particularly holy to Muslims because we believe it is the same as the Valley of Becca, which we find in Jewish tradition, where Ishmael and Hagar settled down. And we view the Kaaba as the original tabernacle, which was built by Ishmael and his father, the prophet Abraham. And that city, as a result, has a hello. So I'll give you a kiss, but I'm in the middle of talk. Is that okay? Yeah. Can you let me finish talking? Thank you, Hassan. Sorry about that, folks. But as a result, Mecca has a spiritually significant role in the Islamic faith because it's where much of the spiritual energy itself is located. The city of Medina is sacred to us because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, founded the Charter of Medina there, and Islamic civilization, so to speak, found its original capital in Medina itself. The word Medina, by the way, is actually, it just means city in Arabic. The full name of the city is Medina an-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And the original name of the town was Yathrib before that. So you can see the significance of it within the socio-political realm of Islam. But the true holy site of Islam itself is the Kaaba, which is found in Mecca. In terms of the role of how sacred it is, well, for one thing, we obviously do the Hajj, the holy pilgrimage in Mecca itself, along with the lesser pilgrimage Umrah. And the word Hijrah, which means journey, is how we date our calendar. The original journey or flight from Mecca to Medina is how the Islamic calendar is dated, not from when Islam was first revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but rather from the moment that he was forced to flee his homeland and go to Yathrib, which was at the time basically a foreign entity to him. So that's the significance of Mecca and Medina in the Islamic tradition. Imam Ahmed, if you wouldn't mind, as being Palestinian yourself, if you could talk about the role of Al-Quds in Islamic tradition, because I have my rather agnostic view of its role, but if you could offer us a thought about that, that would be very helpful and instructive for us all.
Well, as Hamza correctly pointed out, the significance of Mecca because of the Kaaba, and of course the significance of Medina because it was the origin of the Islamic polity, the first time that the first place that Islamic ethics manifested themselves into a collective political body. Well, in the case of Al-Quds or Jerusalem, the significance is the connection to the Prophet's night journey, because it is in Al-Quds that the teachings of Islam, the monotheism of Islam, is tied into the broader Abrahamic faith. The story of the Prophet's night journey to Jerusalem is that when he arrived there, he was two things happened. One was that he ascended, well, he visited hell and heaven, and he ascended into the heavens, and in his ascension to the heavens, he met the major prophets of the other religions, including Moses and Jesus, peace be upon them. And of course, Abraham, our father, peace be upon him. But also it is said that in Jerusalem itself, he was joined by all the prophets and led them in prayer, showing the commonality of the monotheistic religions, that the essence of the message of all the prophets, although the prophets came in different times and locations and to different people, and there are all kinds of differences in practice and subtle differences in belief among those religions, that the essential belief is that God is one. That's the essence. Even Christianity with its Trinitarianism believes in three persons, not three gods. God is one, and that is an essential belief. So this unity of belief in what I like to call the small m Muslim is the significance of Jerusalem. And by the way, if I could squeeze in here one other thing, because someone earlier said that the word that religion doesn't appear in the Torah. In the Quran, there are three different words that can be translated as religion, and the differences among them are interesting. There's iman, there's deen, and there's millah. Millah means a religious community, and that is why we have multiple religious communities. They're the Christians, they're the Jews, the Muslims, et cetera, et cetera. The iman means belief or faith, both the strength of one's faith, but also the details of what it is one believes in. And as I said before, the essential faith of the monotheistic religions is the oneness of God. And deen is a word that is close in meaning to adl, which means justice. Deen is about a way of living. And it's and to the Muslim, the correct way of living is the just way of living. Anyway, that takes us off on a tangent, so I should really stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. We got 5 minutes, Mike.
Well, thank you so much. I think we may run over time with the permission from Dan. First of all, folks, our website is jids.org. Please visit the site. This video will be on it after tomorrow. And second, if you can donate, if you like the work JIDS is doing, please donate generously. And third is, feedback is very critical for us. If you can send an email to the email you got, what you thought about the program. And then I would ask our moderator to ask 3 people who are Islamic scholars are here, Safi Kaskas, Zafar Mirza, and Hashmat. If you can give them 1 minute each or 2 minutes to share the feedback. That's
Okay.
my Safi Kaskas. Looks like
Is Safi still with us?
I'm not sure.
What about Zafar Mirza?
I don't think so.
I think they're gone.
They're gone.
Okay. Okay.
They escaped before you gave them a chance.
We were privileged to hear from Imad al-Din Ahmad, although I think Hamza just called you Ahmad, right? So I just wanted to point out, because Hamza asked you about Al-Quds, which is of course the Arabic name for Jerusalem. And when I think about Al-Quds, I think about the Temple Mount. When I think about the Temple Mount, I think about all of the there's another word for it, all the evil that's been perpetrated by the government of Israel in the last few months and stirring up unneeded controversy. And I wish the government of Israel and that the peoples that live in Israel could show as much love and empathy towards each other as the people in this group do. So I want to thank Dan and Hamza for inviting me in to moderate. I'm flattered. It was an honor to be with a group, and I'll toss it back to Dan.
Well, I want to thank you. Now every time I drive home and I pass your synagogue, I'm going to be thinking about you. May Bethel live a long, long time.
You're allowed to come in and have a cup of coffee.
I will. We'll be back.
It's not good.
I like that he's my friend,
but-
Dan, and you get invited to the coffee at the show.
I do not
Yeah.
eat cereal in the morning. I do not drink coffee, and I don't drink orange juice. I terribly apologize. Nor
And
would
you're
I
friends with
prefer,
Hamza?
but I
How?
prefer any of
Horrified,
those
apparently.
things to those disgusting Ashkenazic dishes that we heard about earlier. Ugh.
There you
And
go.
I'm Ashkenazi. So I want the next meeting, we don't have a date yet. I need to talk to a certain person, but we're going to talk about God in our hearts and in our conduct. And we're going to want to hear a lot of voices, not just questions, but lots of comments. Why does this concept of God matter to us? Not just things we say at prayer. How does it influence our life? One of the things I will just say, and I'm being a panelist, but I tell my wife that I feel guilty sometimes how much I love her, because there's a lot of love that I should be giving to God that maybe I'm not, because one only has so much love. But when we love God, it can transform our conduct with people as well. And so I'm hoping that you all can sort of summon what this has done for you. And if you don't have a love for the holy name, maybe you can come and listen and comment and, be part of this. Because as most of you know, I come from atheists in my family, so I'm very familiar with it. I was a childhood atheist. So all are welcome. But let's let's contemplate maybe the idea of God at the center of our lives and as the most relevant figure, being, concept, whatever words you want to use in our lives, and think about what that can do for us. So we don't have a date yet, but we'll let you know. And I want to thank everybody, the panelists, the moderator. You all did a wonderful job, and I hope this was enlightening for everybody.
And maybe we can start meeting in person one of these days again.
Oh, I think I'm gonna hopefully we'll do that. We got to plan that, but that is the goal.
Been a
That
while.
is the goal. It's been a while. Yeah.
You're here.
You're here. We're here.
Take care, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks everyone. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
Sorry.
Shvach